Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from YarkSpiryFantasyArt.com, and today I'm actually going to be drawing a dragon emerging from the earth in a decomposed bone look. So this was a special request that was made by one of my followers on my DeviantArt account, and the specifications were that I do draw a creature that was emerging from the earth, a dragon specifically, and that the dragon be bone-like, so it's already undergone the process of decomposition. Now, I did add some tissue later on after I finished the initial thumbnail stage for this piece for a couple of reasons. It looks more zombified if I add some tissue. And it's also more realistic too. Otherwise, there's nothing that's actually holding the bones together, and it wouldn't make sense as an overall piece. Now, you could use the excuse that it is magically held together, but by having just some of those elements in there, it makes it a little bit more realistic. It's still not a very realistic point of view or something that would ever happen in real life, but it's also dragon. So as you can see, I'm actually starting on the line work right now. What you saw previously was that I was working on the thumbnail stage for this. And when I was working on the thumbnail stage, I was using the default hard brush throughout. The reason why I stick to that one brush type is that it forces me to keep my drawing very loose, very spontaneous. I'm able to really experiment with a lot of different design aspects in a short period of time because I'm not worrying too much about the structure. Then, as you can see, I go into adding a basic background that's filled with shadows so that I have something to work with, so I'm not working with a blank canvas. And then I change the transparency of that layer and draw on top of it another line layer so that I have a full idea of how I'm actually going to render this piece. It really helps me, especially when there's bone and anatomy involved in a drawing, to really figure out how I'm actually going to draw those aspects. When you're drawing anything that has a lot of bones or anatomy, it's good to do at least a rough sketch so that you have a general idea of how you're going to actually go about approaching the anatomy. And because I did have to keep in mind a lot of different portions for especially the spinal cord, it was something I had to fully plot out so I'd have that general idea. Now, as I was working on this, I was looking at baby turtle reference, specifically when the baby turtles were emerging from the sand. That helped give me a little bit more of a realistic idea of how I was actually going to render this out, as well as I also looked at the trailer for the Lich King, because there is a very specific scene in that preview where you do actually see a dragon emerge from the ice. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do the exact same thing. First off, that was done for a ice-filled area surrounded by snow. So for this reason, I made sure to approach it differently for this. Now, as you can see, I'm working on the bone structure initially. So I'm not concentrating on adding any tissues, anything like that. I'm just working on the bone structure at the moment. It's important that I figure it out correctly at this stage because whatever changes I make afterwards will be impacted detail-wise if I don't fully draw this portion out. Now I'm just hinting at most of the details and the shapes. I am making up a lot of the shapes as I go, so it's not 100% accurate to human or animal anatomy. There is some human characteristics in this anatomy. The hip bones are very human-like, with some animal aspects to them, and this creature actually does have a collarbone attached to him. For the wings, as I was planning this out, I figured out that it would probably be more closely related to where the spinal cord is, and would actually have a separate shoulder blade in order to support that. Now you don't see this in this angle, but if I was actually doing a rotation, you would actually see a separate shoulder blade for the wing area, just because it would require that in order to be able to move properly and have enough mobility for flight. Just working on some extra details for that rib cage. At this stage, I'm not adding all that much shadow. I'm just hinting at the shapes at the moment. I'm going to add in the shadow afterwards once I've actually figured out more of the actual muscle anatomy. Now for the spinal cord, what I did is I actually worked on it on a separate layer so I could fully flesh out the proper bone structure for that. And once I came up with something that did work, all I did was create a mask on top of that and essentially paint in and out the areas that I wanted to show between the collarbones. So I've just started on that right now. And this allows me to get the different levels with as much detail as possible, but also gives me a lot of flexibility later on when I'm actually doing more editing. So now I've actually just added the basic shadows, and this is actually a separate layer that I've added on top of those two previous layers. And once I'm actually happy with this layer, then I will actually flatten all three of those layers so that I have a single layer to work with, so it's easier for me to make additional modifications later on. I generally do collapse in my layers as I work. It helps reduce the size of the file, and it also makes it easier for me to find the different layers that I'm working with. Normally once my grayscale portion is done, almost everything is flattened out to one single layer, after which I will work on the color in a separate group of layers so that I have more mobility when I'm actually doing my editing process. I'm just bumping up some extra details in that spinal cord, and I've just duplicated the other wing. Because I don't require all that much detail, it's going to be hidden because of the smoke. I essentially just copy that in and just paint it over it. Now I'm actually adding the muscle tissue or the remnants of the muscle tissue around the limbs. At this stage, it's very important that I do make it look somewhat realistic, but I'm also trying to show that, well, it's a skeletal type dragon, so I'm actually reducing the amount of detail while trying to still maintain enough of the rib cage that be visible at the same time. So it's a compromise between the two. I want to show a certain amount of muscles, but I also want to show a significant amount of the rib cage below it. And to help tie everything in, it is important that I do add some muscle tissue to head and also to the wings. I'll be adding the muscle tissue to the wings very shortly once I finish the legs and arms and the head. So I'm just starting to add that muscle tissue now into the wings, and I'm making sure to layer it so that it actually looks like it's actually broken up properly. Now, ideally, if this was actually a corpse that was actually starting to rot and break down, this dragon wouldn't have as pristine of a look with the tissue. So you may still get some overlapping, but it would actually become, well, decomposed. So you would see actually some liquidation of some of the tissue. So I'm just adding the rocks. These rocks are once again on a separate layer, and there's a couple of reasons for that. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to make sure that the hand is actually wrapping around that foremost stone later on. And since these are so close to the viewer, it is important that I do show that they are close to the viewer. So I've actually hidden that secondary hand that's actually not grabbing onto the rock behind the rocks. Just adding some fog in there help break it up further. And I've just added my basic color layer, as you see me add quite often before in previous drawings. And to do this, what I've actually just done is I've created a new layer, and I've set the layer blending option to color so that it doesn't change any of the shading, but it automatically adds the color that I've chosen as an overall tint to whatever the shading is. Now I do need to give a reason for why this creature is actually coming back to life, so I did give him almost a type of energy source within him to really help showcase that. Now, while doing this, I did have to also make sure, though, that the rib cages still showed correctly, because you would still see quite a bit of that information showing through as well. Now, because I do have mostly yellows and very light reds in the rest of the piece, I did add a blue type energy color to the creature to help break up the two colors and to have a better contrast as well. Something I actually did, I did two versions of this. The initial version, I actually lost part of the recording, so I wasn't able to actually use it for this week's tutorial, so I had to redraw it. But if you do look on my site or on my DeviantArt account, you'll notice that I actually used two different types of colors as well. The initial dragon drawing actually had a red energy source, whereas this one has a blue. But I've also reversed the base color as well. And because of that, I did choose to go with a blue energy source. So I'm just bumping up and experimenting with some of the shadows. I want the shadows to show fairly properly, so I did experiment with different blending options, and what I actually ended up doing is doing a combination of different blending techniques and then just painting directly the shadow areas that I wanted to. I wasn't able to use the color burn tool for this because it was causing too much of a contrast, which is problematic as well. So I did have to paint that in and just change the opacity of that layer afterwards. This shadow layer had actually about 3 to 4 different layers for it just to achieve the proper effect that I wanted. But once I had it, it looked quite good. Now, for the rocks, I did have to bump up the contrast in certain areas as well to help their shapes read a little bit better, so I just did that on the same layer as well. Now I'm just blurring out some of that hip area so that it appears proper. So this is the final illustration, as you could see. It turned out pretty good. It was really fun to work on. I actually really like to draw skeletal type creatures just because I get to experiment with the anatomy. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope to see you guys next week. Thank you and take care.